Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. This episode, we will be talking about the elections tomorrow in New Jersey, New York City, and Virginia, and I'm also going to be talking about redistricting. Before we go on, I'd like to remind everyone of the devastation in Jamaica, Cuba, and the Bahamas from Hurricane Melissa last week and the week before. Please keep them in your thoughts and prayers in the weeks and months ahead. So, to help me with this discussion, I brought on a previous guest before, my friend Joe, who I've had on the show before the last presidential election, and he gave us a great analysis before and after the election. We'll give you everything you need to know, and let's get right into it. We'll start with Virginia. So, all right, Joe, what are you thinking in Virginia, where the race there doesn't seem very close? What should we be looking for, and things like that? I guess I'll let you take it from here.
Yeah, so Virginia does not look that close. Some polling was sort of close earlier on, but I think I was correct in my analysis that this was not going to be too close in the end. Right now, the polling average, I don't use Real Clear Politics anymore because they kind of have a weird bias in which pollsters they allow, but most other polling averages have Spanberger up by like 10 or 11 points now. We've seen, I think the biggest lead we've seen in a poll for her is 15 points, which was released the other day by YouGov. But we've seen a decent number of double-digit leads for her, especially in the closing days. So the question here in Virginia is really not who's going to win. It's by how much does Abigail Spanberger, the Democrat, win. And I think one of the reasons that this is not too surprising is because Winsome Sears, the Republican candidate, is really not very popular or likable, and that's backed up by the polling data. So I'm not surprised to see her down by a lot here.
Yeah, and I say as someone, and I have to agree, as someone who likes Winsome Sears for various different reasons. But I'm looking at, I do have the Real Clear Politics polling average up here, and they have it at 9%. And the closest poll here is, and I say poll loosely, it's the Trafalgar quote unquote poll, and they have it at 4%, which if Trafalgar showing the Democrat is ahead, that's the time the Democrat is going to win.
Yeah, and also with the Trafalgar poll, which that is not a good polling firm in general, they have Donna Charles, who is a third-party candidate who dropped out like 3 months ago and endorsed Spanberger and is not on the ballot at 4% in their poll. So that's just outrageous. And not a single poll at any point has shown Winsome Sears winning ever. So,
and I think as we'll get to New Jersey in a little bit, I think the same thing is true in New Jersey.
There was one poll like a month or two ago, like Jack Ciattarelli's own poll had him up by 1, but not a single other poll or independent poll has shown him winning, although there's some that show it close. Another thing in Virginia is Attorney General's race, which is actually looking to be quite competitive.
Yeah, I've talked about that on Viewers Will Know About that.
So I have to say, I think that the Democrat Jay Jones is going to win narrowly, but this is very much like a pretty close to toss-up race. We've kind of seen him running behind Spanberger's margin by like around 10 points, if you will, some a little less, some a little higher. Problem I think for him is I don't think the problem is that Jason Miyares is the incumbent Republican sitting attorney general, and he probably had the best chance to win before this scandal as well because he was like the strongest Republican candidate in Virginia compared to the other two. And I just think that with Spanberger likely winning by double digits, maybe if it's like exactly 10 points, or if Spanberger for some reason underperforms, maybe he probably would win if Spanberger wins by less than double digits. But I think that while we will see a double-digit ticket split, it's just Virginia is going to be so blue this year. I'm not sure that actually amounts to a Republican win, especially if we see Spanberger prevailing by 12 or 13 points, which is well within polling results. So I think this is probably the most competitive race out of the whole slate, though, is this Attorney General's race as far as who's going to win.
And that's because of the scandals, which actually I have an episode that'll come out tomorrow, which will be Tuesday, that talks a little bit about that. And I guess that would be because of turnout. So if you think of like a lot of people, if Democrats are able to increase their turnout, though most of them are obviously going to vote down ballot. So that will push Spanberger's up, and that will also push up Jay Jones.
Yep, that's a piece of it. I think that especially in like some of the suburbs of Richmond and Washington, that would probably be where Jason Mieres has the best showing relative to Spanberger. But like especially in the more like southern, like heavily black areas and heavily rural areas, my guess is that the ticket splitting is not going to be that much since it's mostly comes down to turnout there.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so this is especially relevant in New Jersey, which I guess we can segue to now, is that Democrats are turning out at higher rates in early voting
Yes.
compared to 2024. And this is pretty typical in off-year elections. Even in 2022, when the Republicans kind of had a meh showing, they still had a turnout advantage. And this is almost always true for the party opposite of the president.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't really have good numbers for early voting in Virginia because they don't have party registration in Virginia. And also like the rules as to like where people can early vote and like stuff like that kind of changes every year. So it's a little hard to compare one to one. But in New Jersey, we have party registration data for every voter. And so far in the early vote, the Democrats are doing, it looks like about 4 points better overall
Mm-hmm. And
compared
I'll
to
put that graphic on
2024.
the screen at the moment so they can see that.
Yeah. Um, Basically every day of early voting has been more democratic. Now we don't know exactly how day of voters are going to break. That's just kind of an unknown, but I think in general I would only really read into it if like the Republicans were somehow overperforming because that would be kind of a defiance of the pattern. But I think it's definitely correct to expect that the Democrats will have more voters as a percentage of the electorate compared to 2024.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2021, we have some pretty decent data on Virginia with the exit polls. And, you know, Biden won Virginia by 10 points in 2020. And the exit polls showed that of who showed up in 2021, it was like 4 or 5%, like more said they voted for Biden. So just in terms of who turned out, there was a 5% shift in addition to all the people who may have switched their votes from Biden to Youngkin or Biden to Chitterelli in
Oh,
2021.
so that would be like a 5%. Republicans gained 5% in voter turnout,
Yeah, in
right?
2021.
In
And I think it's
2021.
pretty likely to expect the reverse here for the Democrats this time.
And for
'Cause
anyone who's unsure, 2021 was the last time these races were up in
it
New
was,
Jersey and New York City, as we'll get to in a little bit. Although that's not so partisan, that's just, kind of a mess. But yeah,
yeah.
so yeah, I mean, it seems to me in New Jersey, even though New Jersey is the closest one, and I know you don't like Real Clear Politics, but they still have a 3.3%, 3.3 lead for the Republican or the Democrat Mikey Sherrill. Although Atlas Intel's poll has Sherrill only up by 1%. That I was a little surprised by.
Yeah, New Jersey, we've kind of seen a more of a spread. I think that's definitely a more uncertain race. Still, like we said, other than Jack Shirley's own poll, who's a Republican nominee, literally none of them actually have him winning. So that's not great. And the polling averages that I've seen, other than Real Clear Politics, usually have Cheryl winning by about 6 or 7. That seems pretty plausible to me. One thing that we probably should have mentioned at the beginning is that Harris won both Virginia and New Jersey by 6 points in 2024. So
Mm.
that's sort of our baseline. And kind of interesting in New Jersey, Chitterelli is like in 2021 when he sort of he didn't win, but it was like shockingly close. He only lost
Mhm.
by 3 points in 2021. If you actually look at like the underlying results, basically he did really well with sort of like the older Republican coalition of like wealthy white people educated in the suburbs, which is kind of where Trump has done quite poorly. And Trump kind of improved almost across the board in 2024, but his biggest gains and the reason New Jersey was so close is because he did really well with Hispanic voters and to a significant but slightly lesser extent Asian voters, which are two pretty big demographics in New Jersey. And so that's sort of if you look at the 2021 results, even though Jack Shirley came close, he basically did the same as Trump did against Biden with these minority groups. So really not very well. And
Mm.
so kind of the interesting dynamic here is Jack Shirley has sort of more embraced the Trump. Yeah, well, he has more embraced Trump himself and sort of the Trump style of republicanism. And so I guess he's trying to claw into those gains in minority areas that made New Jersey pretty close in 2024. But it may come at the expense of doing so well with educated white voters who generally don't like Trump. And so he's kind of trying to thread the needle. And I think just because it's such a blue year, he's not going to be able to do it. But I think that if Harris had won the 2024 election, he probably would be winning potentially by a healthy margin because he is sort of more popular than Trump is with sort of moderate suburban voters. And I also do want to talk about the polling in these races. So Atlas Intel was, I think, the best pollster in the 2024 election. They don't have a super long track record. I think they polled a few races in 2022, and I think that they did just okay. They like had Herschel Walker winning narrowly, I think in Georgia. Not sure if there were any other races that they polled. Herschel Walker lost by about 3 points, by the way, in 2022. But in 2024, they were quite accurate. And I looked at their polls. They have Spanberger winning by, I think, 8 or 9 points, and then they had Sherrill winning by 1 point in New Jersey. So that was kind of the more surprising result. And one of the things, though, with that poll is that it seems to have been weighted very conservatively. And what I mean by that is they basically modeled who they selected to be in their poll based on the 2024 electorate, if not even more Republican than the 2024 electorate.
Mm.
A lot of polls, any race will ask, like, what's your approval of Trump? They would often ask the same of Biden back during the races under him. And they actually had Trump with a -5 approval rating in New Jersey. And keep in mind, he lost New Jersey by 6 points. So that would actually imply that, at least among the voters that Atlas Intel is suggesting will vote, that Trump is more popular than in 2024. Now, there's some kind of variance in what we're seeing as far as Trump's approval polling, but most national averages have him down by quite a lot. I think actually, just as we're recording this, Trump has hit a record low in approval nationally. I'm going to pull up the Silver Bulletin approval rating. He doesn't have anything for the partisan races, but he does have Trump's approval rating, and he has it at -11 nationally, which is a record low actually just this week.
Is that the record low, including the first term or just
not including the first term? I think if you
I
include
didn't
the
think so,
first
'cause
term,
first term approval.
it got pretty low. I think actually -11 was probably like where he was during a good chunk of the first term. It was not the record low during the first term.
The record low, I believe, was probably around -20. I think that was right after January 6th. But he was already walking out the door by then, so that didn't really matter.
I'm pulling it up. It looks like he had actually -20 at some points in 2020, I think. So maybe that was like the beginnings of COVID, or maybe like the summer of 2020. And then he was around -17, -18 after at the very end, after he had denied the results of the election and the January 6th insurrection. So that was kind of his low point. But -11 is still quite low. This is like Biden. This is not much higher than Biden, if not basically the same as Biden. So he's gotten there quite a lot quicker than Biden. Biden's approval was not this low, this fast, if you will.
Oh, really? Huh. I thought his approval was around 40%, but well, no, I think it's a little above 40% by this time in 2021. They both dropped off pretty fast.
Yeah, but it was faster for Trump, and that was a more dramatic. Now Biden's never recovered at any point. He basically got down to like 40% or so, and kind of never recovered more than just bouncing around a couple points as usual. By the way, the actual approval number is 43, which is like a little better than what we were seeing Biden for most of his term, but the net of -11 is still quite low. And anyway, what I was trying to say with that is that if Trump lost New Jersey by 6 points and he won nationally by about a point, I mean, that would imply that Trump should be well into the double digits negative in New Jersey and Virginia as well. And so for Atlas Intel to have a poll saying that Trump is basically more popular than in 2024, that seemed pretty hard to reconcile with the national polling, which we have. Obviously we've gotten a lot of state polling in the last couple weeks because the elections are coming up. But I mean, we've had multiple national polls every single week for the whole term, and they're basically telling a reasonably consistent story, except for the Republican internal polls like Trafalgar Group, which have him. Even they tend to have him, or Rasmussen reports, they have him like, maybe like -3 or something, like better than expected, but not too low. And even that would be a much lower approval rating than -5 in New Jersey. So we'll see if they're working some magic that we're not expecting, like they did in 2024. Although, to be fair, their results in 2024 were pretty close to the polling averages, maybe just like a point or two to the right, which is
Who was
kind of
Trafalgar?
no Atlas Intel.
Oh, Atlas Intel. Yeah, I was looking
Yeah,
at the last poll that they did nationally before the election on November 3rd and November 4th with a sample size of almost 3,000, Trump +1, which is
basically
basically
correct.
what it ended up being.
Yeah, yep. And
No.
I think they did have Trump winning Wisconsin and Michigan, which I think the polling averages had Harris very narrowly ahead in those states.
Oh.
So, but I mean, all with like well within the margin of error, just like a point or two. So, they had a good showing in 2024, but I don't see how this methodology is going to yield a correct result, at least most likely. If Spanberger only wins by like 7 or 8 points, and maybe Cheryl loses, that would kind of indicate that, like, okay, Trump actually is, relatively speaking, popular, basically a net even, or actually plus approval nationally, because I don't see how else you would get these results in
Hmm.
polling and have a national approval numbers be correct. So I think that, in New Jersey, it's a little more complicated since Chitterelli is kind of a strong candidate and is personally more popular than Trump. But Virginia is kind of a pretty standard situation. So I think the margin in Virginia relative to the 6-point loss in 2024 will tell us a lot about just how popular or unpopular Trump is right now. And that's also a good segue into New York City, because their Atlas Intel poll of New York had Trump's approval was like -28 or something, which,
That number sounds familiar, but it does not sound right.
yep.
So,
And they have a surprisingly good result for Cuomo and Sliwa. Most polling in New York is pretty solid for Mamdani. It's not clear that he'll get over 50%, but it seems quite unlikely that he's actually going to lose to Cuomo, especially since Cuomo has failed to sort of consolidate the Republican vote. Now, if Sliwa dropped out, I still don't think that Cuomo would win, because people tend to do this with third-party candidates, is they just add. Well, really, Cuomo is a third-party candidate, but whenever they're thinking if people will drop out, what will the effect be? They just kind of completely add the candidate they want to drop out to the preferred candidate, but that's not really how it works. Maybe if Sliwa is getting like 12 to 15% and Cuomo is losing by like 10 to 12, that doesn't mean that the race is going to be even. It might cut into that margin by like half or something, but it would require a very large polling error for Cuomo to win this. And I'm interested if Sliwa may actually do better than his polling, because it seems like Cuomo's not going to win. So maybe people are just who don't like Andrew Cuomo but are Republicans, might actually just stick with Sliwa, the Republican, since they're not
he's
going
the
to beat
Republican.
Mondami. Yeah, I mean, Cuomo's made a big fuss about trying to get him to drop out, but Cuomo really is the spoiler here. I mean, he lost the Democratic primary by a large margin. I think he lost by 13 points with the ranked choice voting. To editorialize a little bit, I mean, he basically he resigned because he was going to be impeached as governor because of his sexual assault allegations. And then, sort of after that, it came out that he had basically sent COVID patients to nursing homes, causing, hundreds or thousands of deaths. So, I don't see why Republicans should be voting or should want to vote for Andrew Cuomo. So I'm not at all surprised that he's not really consolidating the right wing or conservative vote. He's basically just sort of relying on, cobbling together some of that plus some independents, maybe plus some of the more anti-Mamdani Democrats. But he really is the spoiler here, and he's going to lose because of it, because he's not going to be able to win a three-way race, basically.
And if I may say, like, what I'm really confused by is the base that Andrew Cuomo doesn't have a base of support. You think Mondami is the Democrat? He, even though it seems like if you watch the news, it's actually Cuomo that's the Democrat, and while he is a Democrat, Mondami is the Democratic nominee, and so he is always going to have that support of, like, there are people who will go to the polls and they will vote whoever the Democrat is, and then obviously Curtis Sliwa, he is the Republican. There are people who will go to the polls and they will always vote Republican. You think, like, what is the base that Andrew Cuomo has? He doesn't. One, as an independent, or you don't really have a base, and two, for the reasons that you explained, he's got scandals all up the wazoo. Like that, I find it very. The only reason I would ever vote for Andrew Cuomo or consider vote, not that I could, but if I would, it would be against Mondami. And Mondami, in my opinion, even though he's a so-called socialist, is not that dislikable.
Yeah, he is like the most well liked in terms of like personality by far in basically every poll. Cuomo and Sliwa are both negative to varying extents. Sliwa, I imagine, mostly just because he's a Republican, and Cuomo, for obvious reasons, is not very well liked. So Mondani's the only one with he has a net favorable of like 10 or so, which honestly is not that good. Like I really think that like, I mean, Sliwa's kind of not a too, I don't know how strong of a candidate he really is, but you know, for Republicans that actually like invested in trying to get a good Republican candidate, they probably could have beat Mondani because he is not doing well for a Democrat in New York. Um,
It is. I actually think Andrew Cuomo is doing a lot better than he should, considering the situation he is in, and he is not the
yeah,
Democratic nominee. Considering Mondami might not win 50% of the vote, I'm looking at the polls here. The only poll is Emerson College. They have a 50% exactly. All the other ones are just below, and that's kind of embarrassing to be.
yeah. I mean, there are
University.
still some undecideds in those polls, so it's like I'm thinking like he might like just squeak over 50%, but you know, it'll be borderline. And
The fact that it's not clear, like, I always look at 50%, is someone over 50%, and if they're not, it doesn't mean they're going to lose. It just means that the support is not as strong as I would think it should be,
yeah,
and depending on the situation. And I mean, I can pull up the results of the last election.
66, yeah, and then there was
Yeah.
some third party. He won by about 40 points, which is basically like slightly more than the result in 2024. So that was a pretty normal race in 2021
So,
for
and
mayor, which
Curtis
is kind
Sliwa
of
got
why I say I don't know that Saliwa is necessarily like the guy to do it, but like, you know, a pretty competent Republican, you know, who were able to campaign against Mondani should have a chance. And Cuomo is really the spoiler because he lost the Democratic primary. I mean, you know, I think really, you know, people are kind of making Mondani the main character of this race, but you know, he was polling at just, you know, 2 or 3%. He's a member of the state legislature in New York. He represents a district in New York City, but he was not really a big name or anything. It's just because there were no other alternatives or not many alternatives to Andrew Cuomo, and the Democratic Party, you know, as an institution, didn't really do anything to stop Andrew Cuomo from being the nominee. That, you know, Mamdani was kind of able to come from behind and win that primary. And instead of realizing that he had just lost by double digits to somebody who, like a month before, was basically a complete nobody, Andrew Cuomo stubbornly decided to run again as an independent rather than either endorsing Eric Adams or letting a Republican run against a Democrat. It's just very selfish and kind of in keeping with the rest of his behavior that Cuomo would choose to play spoiler here, basically just because he doesn't want to quit. But I
no.
think
Well,
it's almost, I mean, there's really almost no doubt that Mondani is going to win now because of the three-way dynamic, and he's the Democratic nominee, so he's going to get the most of that support.
I still think that's crazy because I remember really, because the primary was at the end of June. Even like the first and second week in June, it still looked like Andrew Cuomo was going to win, and then toward the end, Mondami started to rise in the polls, and he never
Yeah,
crossed Andrew Cuomo in the polls until the primary. But you kind of got
yeah,
that sense that he was moving up.
he was gaining. He never led the polls. I mean, but he went from like nothing to like somewhat competitive, and then
Yeah,
yeah,
like
he won pretty handily in the end.
if you're
So
someone who doesn't really follow politics, the first time you probably heard of Mondami was probably in the week before or the week of the primary, and there's a
yep,
reason for that.
yeah, because he came out of nowhere.
Most people didn't know who he was back on Memorial Day. Quite impressive. So we'll have to. I mean, we'll have to wait and see on that one.
Yeah,
I think
I don't think there's too much. that we can learn from the results of that race. I mean,
It,
I like I said, I expect Mondani to be around 50%, maybe a little above, maybe a little below, but the result is not much in question. But I don't think that tells us much about the future as far as the midterms or anything like that. He will be a punching bag, I assume, in rhetoric for the Republicans, but that's kind of to be expected for something like
mhm.
this.
Even if it was Andrew Cuomo, he would still be Andrew Cuomo
Yeah,
would be a
and
punching bag.
rightfully
So,
so. I mean, there's really, I honestly am like you said, I'm kind of surprised Cuomo is doing as well as he is. I mean,
mhm.
maybe he will do like he only get 25% like that Emerson poll or something like that. Because I really don't see there's not much reason to vote for him other than not liking Mamdani, which is understandable. I mean, he's a socialist, but I mean,
Mhm.
still, I mean, Andrew Cuomo is a bad man, objectively speaking, whether regardless of politics, and so that does matter to some extent, especially in a race that's not strictly partisan, unlike the Virginia race, like we were talking about. The next biggest race, which kind of has kind of fallen off the news because it's not very competitive, is the Proposition 50 referendum in California. This is basically to allow Democrats to gerrymander California, uh, with the rationale being in response to Republicans who had gerrymandered Texas in 2021 after the census, to who basically re-gerrymandered it to, they say, gain 5 seats. It's really more like 4, but basically they're trying to gain seats just by redrawing the maps, which in Texas there are basically no laws preventing them from doing that, and so the Republican trifecta there did. But in California, there's a independent redistricting commission, which I don't need to get into the weeds of. I'm not sure that it's like the best system ever, but there's no overt rigging of the maps in California. If Proposition 50 passes, which it will, it is up by roughly 20 points or so, which is about how much Harris won California by.
When Gavin Newsom said, "Stop giving us money. We don't need more money."
Yeah, it's there's no the Republicans have given up on trying to prevent this passage. The early vote is, I'm hearing that the turnout is actually really, really high in California, which is kind of interesting for something that's basically just a referendum. But the early voting is favoring the Democrats there, similar to New Jersey, which is, again, kind of typical for the off year, favoring the out party. But I think that this will basically result in a net of 4 to 5 seats for the Democrats. The most likely outcome would be a 48 Democrat to 4 Republican map, which I believe the Republicans have 9 now. There will be at least 1 or 2 seats that are competitive, which is also the case in the Texas map. But it'll basically, you could call it a wash, if you will, with the Texas map. It
Right.
will basically counteract that, and this will pass easily. And then I imagine sometime before the end of the year, maybe the Democrats will officially pass their map, which is likely to
Right.
be 48 to 4 in favor of Harris.
Which would be gained roughly a 5.
Yeah,
So,
assuming that they're able to perform as basically as well as Harris, which they will probably do better if we're
which
being
of
honest.
course they probably
So
would. So,
yeah,
anyone out there who's seen the maps online of every district in California being like Democrat, that won't be happening. So
yeah,
put that on the bookshelf. That won't be
and
happening.
and and one reason for that is because the Voting Rights Act is still in force, which it may not be
It may not be in
in the near
2028.
future, but we will see if it comes to that. My guess is still, and we can talk about this more in the future, redistricting in general, but I think that maps you see where basically every seat is, for the party who controls the state, is, in some cases it will be like, maybe Alabama or something, but in a lot of states they do what they're called packs, basically, to make one seat so overwhelmingly to the opposition party. In California, it would be the Republicans, that the surrounding seats are completely safe, because they basically just spread out the votes that are favorable to them into all the other districts besides the couple that they leave for the other party. And so
Right.
that's why, I mean, Texas is, you know, not like deep, deep, deep red anymore, but it's still pretty red. I mean, technically, if you really wanted to, aside from the Voting Rights Act, could draw it so that every single district voted Republican, but then they wouldn't be very safe uh, Republican. And so
Which would
that's
leave
why
them
they leave some Democratic seats in the cities, basically.
which would leave them vulnerable to fall if they,
Yeah.
and obviously they wouldn't want that. And I guess the big question here is will be next year in the future will be the Voting Rights Act, which we'll have to come back to at another time. And I've talked about that before by myself, is because that'll cost because I've heard a lot in the news that it's supposed to, and I've said it before. I think I've said it before, where they look at maps in the South and they're like, oh well, Democrats are going to lose 12 seats here. That's going to be the end of they're never going to be able to. I've heard that on the right wing media as well. They're like, if we can just get rid of the Voting Rights Act, the Democrats can't ever come back to power, and it's really not quite that simple.
Yeah, I mean, well, maybe at the absolute. Well, the other thing is that they kind of included Florida in that, which has some
Right,
seats that are not really the constraint there is not the Voting Rights Act, is that there are still it's the constraint is that there are still a decent number of Democrats in Florida, and so it's not super easy to draw at every single seat, basically.
right. Well,
Um,
40% of voters in Florida are still Democrats. Last
yeah,
I checked,
that's
at
a little
least they
more.
vote that
I
way.
mean, it was like 13 points for Trump, so a little over 40%.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they have to have some Democratic seats. Like I said, maybe Alabama they'll go actually would be all Republican because it's so red and it's not that hard to do it. But also, we one thing that we missed is in Virginia, the Democrats are basically planning to do their own version of Proposition 50. In Virginia, you have to pass an amendment in two separate sessions, and so they passed it this week. And then once the governor's race is over, and assuming that things go according to plan, also the state legislature is up in Virginia and New Jersey. Both of those are expected to go solidly for the Democrats. In Virginia, they're likely to gain actually a lot of seats, probably get to like 60 or so out of 100. And in New Jersey, they already have like 60% or so. So there's not much to worry about there. So once they pass it again, basically after the election, they will have to have a Proposition 50 like referendum in
Well,
Virginia,
right. Yeah.
and then so that's one thing you could keep an eye on is how much. Now California takes so long to count, but we'll have an idea. I mean, usually we do at least get like 3/4 or so on election night. How much Proposition 50 is passing by. I remember Harris won California by about 20 and Virginia by about 6. So if Proposition 50 is like passing by less than 15 points, that's pretty worrying because that would imply that it might not be able to pass in Virginia, or maybe even probably not likely to pass in Virginia. So that's something to keep an eye on. I think like we're seeing in the polling, it looks to be passing by 20 points or so, maybe more, depending on what that turnout looks like. But so we'll see. But that could enable Democrats to gain several seats in Virginia in 2026. This would not have to wait till 2028 like some other things might. But yeah, that's basically the overview of the upcoming elections. From almost everything I've seen, I am expecting that we will be able to call this a blue wave when it's all said and done. But we'll see the results before too long, and then we'll be able to know.
I have to agree. I mean, at this current moment, the only thing that gives me pause is that the Democrats' approval on their over, and I know you and I have talked about this before, is quite low. Their party image is only at 28%. But if I remember, according to NBC,
I think I've seen some polling with the approval of both parties, and the Democrats are lower overall.
yes,
But it's still basically like they're both pretty unpopular with self-described independents, and so I don't, it's not like a great, like they do have some internal problems, but I think that that's going to be more of a question for the 2028 election when they actually have to unite around one candidate for the whole country. But when it comes to off-year elections and midterms, people are usually able to identify more with candidates like from their own state and stuff like
right.
that, and it's usually not as much of an issue. Whereas kind of easy to unite against the incumbent president, who pretty much every Democrat and many independents have a negative view of. And so that's kind of, in the short term at least, it should not be a crippling problem
Right.
that the Democrats are not very popular, because the Republicans aren't particularly popular either.
And the
It's
president is not really popular either,
Yeah,
as we talked about.
unless we are in for a shock on Tuesday, the president does not appear to be very popular at all. We Like I said, he just hit that record low. I mean, we've seen some bouncing around. It basically Trump's Afghanistan moment, if you will, where his approval really started to tank, was
Chris?
Liberation Day back
Yep,
in,
Liberation Day. Yep,
I think it
I
was
remember.
April.
That is when I personally flipped from approve to disapprove, and then I did kind of flip back, but since then I have flipped back again. It's very I would describe this. It's kind of like the president's approval is always really at the top. Like that's really like above everything.
Yeah, at
People,
least in a midterm.
especially in a midterm. I mean, I would say argue in a general election that's important as well. But
Yeah, it is.
it really if Trump's approval rating was like +10, then we'd be in a completely different world. But it's not.
Yeah, and if we remember, Biden was, I don't remember the exact figure, but like minus double digits on election day in 2024, like maybe minus 16 or something.
If I
So
remember correctly,
absolutely in the gutter.
we were at 27% the right track. 27% of Americans believed that we were on the right track at that
That
time.
no, that number is always low, I feel like, but the
But
approval rating is
but
very
that was
easy to
very,
track.
very low. That was one
Yeah,
of the
yeah,
lowest
it
we've
may be
ever
lower
seen.
than usual. I don't actually follow that particular question too closely, but I believe it.
It was low. I can try to pull at least, but I believe right now I believe it's -19, which is actually quite high. Even though most people, the last time that we've had right track over wrong track, I think was like 20 years ago. It's been a long time. Most people
Yeah,
are not happy with how
that
things
sounds
are.
about right.
It,
Okay,
it's
wow. Yeah, you're right about this. Okay, so it looks like it was like in the minus 30s net in 2024, and now it's like minus 15 to 20.
it was extremely low. So it's actually,
Yeah.
I'm actually surprised considering all that's happened that
You know,
Trump's approval is quite as high as it
I'm
is.
looking at this chart, and one thing that I think is that it seems like after the presidential election, people are a little more hopeful, and that it's sort of like they're like, oh boy, this is back
It
to the
happened in
same old.
2021.
Yeah, yeah, because I see a gap in 2021 where it wasn't so bad, and similar in 2012, and even a little bit in 2017. So that's probably one of the reasons that we're seeing that.
Right now, according to Real Clear Politics, which as biased as it is, it's I think overall the numbers are
Yeah,
broadly correct.
I mean,
Because
it's not that Real Clear. It's not that the numbers are completely wrong. It's more so the problem that I have with Real Clear Politics is that they include a lot of like Republican internal polls, and then they like don't include a lot of Democratic internal polls, which I think I'm fine with. I really don't like the internal polls for either side. But then there are also some independent polls that they don't include for some reason, and it's very weird. So I think it tends to be a little bit skewed, although it's still a polling average. It's usually not going to be outrageous. But I think it's not the best these days anymore. I think if the Nate Silver average is available, that's probably the best. And then there are some other availables like Decision Desk HQ has polling averages. Maybe the New York Times, depending on exactly what. There are better places these days, I think. So 538 is a great website that got defunded by Disney. There's a new website called 50 plus 1 that is made by some of the same people. So that's a decent source as well. But I think you might have to pay for some of it. I'm not sure.
it's 58 plus 1.
50 plus 1.
50.
Minus,
Okay, I was
yeah.
like, where'd the 58 come from? I'm like,
Yeah, I don't know.
that's like unless we annex parts of Canada, which I
Yeah.
totally support, by the way, then I don't think we're gonna be I don't think we're gonna be at 58 anytime soon.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty clear view of the race here, what we kind of have, and we'll definitely have to come back and talk about this and what this means in 2026, a year from now. And what I tend to look for is I was doing some reflecting this morning, and I tend to look for there's a couple of things I tend to look for when it comes to a midterm. Is I look at the state of the economy, the president's approval rating, whether we're on the right track. And I don't necessarily mean like I need polling numbers, but I can usually kind of feel it in the media and among voters. And then I guess kind of like whether, for the lack of a better phrase, like whether voters are in an ass kicking kind of mood. I remember in 2021, I felt like voters were really in an ass kicking mood. By 2022, I thought that had changed because of the abortion situation.
Yeah, that's a great point because and usually there are exceptions, but usually there's at least a decent correlation between the results in, especially Virginia. New Jersey kind of does its own thing sometime, which is why I think it's going to be actually a decent bit closer. But especially in Virginia, there's usually a decent correlation between the midterms and the results in Virginia. Like in 2021, Youngkin won in a 12-point swing from 2020, and that would have indicated a 2010 or 2014 like midterm red wave, which I think we were basically on track for until we had a lot of surprises in 2022 that sort of it still ended up being a Republican leaning year, but it made it a lot closer because of the abortion and because Trump sort of came back onto the scene, whereas he had kind of been receding from the headlines in 2021. And in 2017, Ralph Northam, the Democrat, won by 9 points. Hillary Clinton had won Virginia by about 4.5. And Virginia was really a lot more of a swing state, even in 2016. Obama had won it twice, but it voted pretty similarly to the whole country. So it was a pretty competitive state. That's not really the case anymore. Virginia is a blue state now. And so I think that's why I'm expecting a little bit of a bolder margin for Spanberger than maybe Northam was able to achieve.
And I'll just throw in there that Hillary Clinton, even though she won 4.5 in Virginia, her running mate Tim Kaine was from Virginia, so there was probably a little bit of benefit there. So if anything, Democrats did even better. That 4.5 to 9% was probably even a little bit more.
Yep. Yeah, that was a meaningful swing. And also, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Harris did not. So Harris not only lost the popular vote, but did better in Virginia. So Virginia has definitely become a more solidly blue state compared to 2016. So I think a margin more like, maybe 12 or 13 points instead of 9 might be more in line with what we're expecting here.
And I would say instead, and I'm sure you agree, except for this attorney general's race in Virginia, the Democrats should be feeling pretty good. I mean, honestly, at this point, Democrats probably don't want the Democrat to win. Yeah, I know if I was a Democrat,
I'm curious. I think that they might force him to resign like immediately. I don't know if they will or not, but that might be a strategy.
Hopefully they do.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know.
And I have an episode planned tomorrow, a little bit about that. If anyone wants to know what's going on there, I've made some endorsements in this race, in these races. I'll give you a spoiler. Most of the people I endorsed, I do not think will be winning. So that's a little bit of a spoiler there. But he's done some not good stuff, and kind of like Andrew Cuomo,
yep.
although he hasn't killed anybody yet. So
yeah, that's true. Cuomo's got to be the worst. Yeah, I think most people could agree on that at least.
And many people wanted Andrew Cuomo to be our president. So
yeah, well, that was before some of the stuff came out, but yeah.
Until the stuff came out. Yep. So, all right. Well, I think that's all for this episode. Unless you have anything else to add.
One thing I'll add is there's this website called State Navigate that the guy who made it is from Virginia, and they're going to have a model for Virginia. So it's a free website that could be a good place to watch the results besides the New York Times or CNN or something like that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But other than that, I think we basically covered it.
Yeah, I'm going to take a look at it right now and pull it up. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, it does look like a great website. Highly recommend. I can tell just by looking at it. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. And then after the election, we'll have to come back and take a look once we have the numbers. Yep. But we should get, I guess the last thing I'll throw out here is, except for Prop 50 in California, because that's on the West Coast, for people who live on the East Coast, because most of the country lives on the East Coast, or at least in Eastern and Central time, we should get these election results fairly quickly, I would think.
Yeah. The Virginia race will probably be called within an hour, like before 9 o'clock or so, unless we're getting a surprise. Yeah, the polls close at like 7. I think it's 8 in New Jersey. New Jersey will be a little slower, but not like horrible, I think. New Jersey we won't have like full results until the next day. Probably not like late the next day, but like maybe like noon or something. But unless it's really close, we'll probably be getting a call in New Jersey, like late in the night, but not super late. And then Prop 50 will probably be projected immediately or almost immediately, but we won't have the final results for about a week or two. But it won't be close. So, and then New York City shouldn't be too slow, I think. I think actually New York City's New York, to their credit, unlike some of the Western states, has actually gotten their act together as far as counting votes quickly. So should be getting decent results for that without too much delay. So, we should have a pretty clear idea at least of what's going on by midnight or so, I think.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I mean, that sounds great to me. Always, when you live on the East Coast and you follow politics in America, it's always annoying because you're the one staying up late, as opposed to people live in Hawaii or Alaska, and they can start watching at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Thanks for coming on, and we'll have to have you on very soon.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you. That is it for everything this episode. Thank you for tuning in as always. You will be hearing from me again tomorrow, actually, where I will make some endorsements for these races that we discussed today. So if you're interested in that, please come back tomorrow. That's all for now. Thank you and bye-bye.